Thank you for joining us tonight for the latest installment of Novel at Home, a series of virtual author events bringing authors to your living room or your home office or wherever you're leisure zooming these days. Your support is so valuable to a small business like ours, and we're so glad to see you. In bookseller world, there's always something exciting about getting through the holiday shopping season and turning the page on a brand new year of programming, promotions, and new releases. At Novel, our booksellers have been passing around ARCs of Sarah Langan's Good Neighbors for months now, and we were absolutely thrilled at the chance to host an online event with Sarah and our old friend and staff obsession, Grady Hendrix, no less. The night is finally here, and we couldn't be any more honored to welcome Sarah and Grady tonight. If you haven't purchased your copy of Good Neighbors yet, get your order in tonight for your chance to win a personal Zoom with Sarah and her editor for your book club, friend group, or just for yourself. For a limited time, you can get your copy with a signed book plate for 20% off. I'll put the order link in the chat during the event, so you can just go ahead and snap it up tonight. Did also want to let y'all know about another online event we have in February, a launch for Mark Grady's upcoming Relentless, which is his 10th Gray Man novel. It's on Tuesday, February 16th at 6 p.m. Mark will be joined in conversation with Joshua Hood, whose latest Treadstone adventure just released today. Registration is available on Eventbrite, and you can order signed or personalized copies of Relentless on our homepage. And now, without further delay, I'm thrilled to welcome tonight's guest. Grady Hendrix is a New York Times bestselling novelist and screenwriter based in New York City. He's the author of Horror Store, My Best Friend's Exorcism, Paperbacks from Hell, We Sold Our Souls, and 2020's The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, all of which received critical praise from outlets including NPR, The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Paste, BuzzFeed, and more. On a personal note, Grady has been a great friend to Novel over the years, Skyping and or Zooming into book club meetings on 2 different occasions and bringing down the house both times. Grady will be joined tonight with the author of the hour, Sarah Langan, whose new book, Good Neighbors, was released just today. It's already gotten a ton of buzz, both among our booksellers and everywhere else. A Columbia MFA graduate and 3-time Bram Stoker Award winner, Langan is the author of 3 previous novels, including The Keeper. She grew up on Long Island and currently lives in Los Angeles with her husband and daughters. You can find out more at sarahlangan.com. We're so honored to have you both with us tonight. After Sarah and Grady wrap up their discussion, we'll open things up to audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask questions that you might have rather than the chat. Audience, let's give Sarah and Grady a warm virtual welcome.
Yay. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We're actually going to go ahead if you want to throw a question into the Q&A or into the chat sidebar. I'll keep my eye on them, and after a few minutes, we'll jump back and forth between chatting and questions. And I want to say about Good Neighbor, Sarah's book, that it's really, really cool when someone you know writes a book that you genuinely love and you don't have to fake it. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. I think we were just talking. This is one of Amazon's picks of the month for February. Good Neighbors is Barnes & Noble's book club pick for February. And what was it with Entertainment Weekly, Sarah?
It was one of their February must-reads.
Yeah, so that's amazing. And it must feel really nice to have a book come out and be like, people care.
But you just have to wait like 12 years and then.
Exactly. Before we talk about Good Neighbors, though, I have a question. And a lot of people on here don't know that you have a master's in environmental toxicology. I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay, what is it?
So it's environmental health science with a like a major in toxicology. So it's a more science-based. There's like public health, which has to do with policy, but environmental health science toxicology is more about the science-based human health effects. So it's any kind of toxin, be it like a smoke plume or radon or something in the food, like your whatever that is in the apple seeds. Is it tiny bits of arsenic?
Yeah, something like that.
The way that it affects the human body on a whole body level, an organ level, a cellular level, and then the way that it affects masses of people, so statistically. And then
you had already, go ahead.
And then my emphasis was toxicology, because that's, I liked watching, thinking about the way that organs fail and stuff. But the other emphasis you could have had was epidemiology, which I also studied for the degree.
So wait, but you got your master's after you had published a couple of novels, right?
No, so
you had okay.
So I was working in publishing, and when you're writing, you have that question of, am I supposed to keep going in my career? Because they start offering you either promotions or nothing. And you just want to keep your writing at night, and you can't really take the promotion. And I was like, why don't I just study something that I love, so that if I'm working full time at it, then at least it'll be feeding the writing. It'll probably pay a little better. And then I can keep being a writer, as opposed to feeling like I'm avoiding people because I don't want to be asked to do more work for a promotion I don't want, so, so, or whatever, so I enrolled in the program at NYU, and at the same time, like a month later, my book deal came through. So I was like, I guess I'm just going to do this anyway and see if I can do both. So Keeper came out my second year in the program, the second half of it, and my professors just accommodated my schedule, which is really nice.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so one thing you said just a second ago, which I feel like should be like your motto, is you were saying, I enjoy watching organs fail. So yeah, what is it about toxicology? Like, is it just like seeing the breakdown of things? What's fascinating about that?
I think it's a concrete thing. There's no anarchy involved. It's like if a chemical, if you take some kind of painkiller and mix it with alcohol, it's going to hurt your liver and it might cause some cancer. And this is the exact molecular mechanism that makes that happen. It's so concrete and so interesting to me in that way. But it's also, it has all these moral questions. You have to, in order to create environmental policy, you have to say, well, if 1 in 1,000 people get sick from this, that's probably acceptable for the overall population if it drives up the standard of living to such a degree. And you're constantly making these moral decisions that I think the general population isn't aware of and doesn't consider. It's like, oh, if 1 in 1,000,000 people die from this or get sick from this, we shouldn't have it. We should eradicate it. And that's pretty much impossible. You can't do that. There's so many things out there that may have health impacts that most people, healthy people, will have no impact at all. So, and it's something that hasn't come up at all with the pandemic. And I think we should all be wearing masks, we should all be home, but I'm not clear on why epidemiologists and health scientists haven't been part of policy as much as I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. So to go from watching organs fail to Long Island, which, very similar things. So your first book was set in Maine, and was The Missing set in Maine also?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. And then Audrey's Door is New York City, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So now this is Long Island, which is where you grew up?
Mm-hmm.
And you grew up, and is this actually where you grew up, this roughly?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a town called Garden City, and this town is called Garden City. I mean, it's like a loosely based, it's not the same town, it's a fictionalized account, but yeah.
Okay, so why'd you go home?
I think because I wasn't near home anymore, it was easier to talk about. And also, I think it's the perfect setting for the kind of thing that I'm talking about, which is middle class, upper middle class people with who are trying to hold on to an American dream. Like, you don't live outside of New York and commute unless you've got some goals going on. And I think because it's set in the near future, Good Neighbors, life's just a little bit harder because of global warming impacts, at least in the setting of this book. And those anxieties are a lot greater. And where I grew up in Long Island is a very competitive place. There was a lot of jockeying in school. There was a lot of jockeying among parents for dominance, for wealth. And I thought that was a great hotbed. You know, you don't find that in Maine, where I went to college, or New York City. You'll find all different kinds of people, but there's enclaves in Long Island, like the one that I mentioned, that are very homogenous.
Well, I was going to ask, you know, you were just saying that, and just for people who don't know, to give them the quick log line, and I won't make you do it because I hate being asked to do this for my books, but the book is about this neighborhood in Long Island, just basically a block, pretty much, like one block in this town, Maple Street, and a sinkhole opens up and has everything kind of comes unraveled from there, roughly. But, you know, one thing that's interesting you just said is how this is the near future. And I know that's in the book, but it doesn't, like, I didn't feel like I was reading William Gibson. You know what I mean? Where like that was an overarching thing. Why did you set it a little bit forward to get the global warming in there? Because that definitely tightens the screws, the weather.
Yeah, I thought, global warming is like inevitable right now. There are things we can do to mitigate it. There are things we can do over time that we could be fine in the future, but we're going to go through some rough changes. And I thought around then was when things will really, the hurricanes, the crazy weather, the sinkholes. I wouldn't have predicted that we'd be having sinkholes constantly now. When I wrote,
we are?
Yeah, like go to the internet and it's like, was there a sinkhole today? And there's a sinkhole. Like somebody just wrote on my Facebook page that there was, from Jersey, that they had one yesterday. And at the bottom of my hill, where we live in Los Angeles, sinkhole. And they had to close the road for 6 months to do repairs on it. It's happening faster than I thought it would.
Wait, but how are sinkholes linked to global warming?
It's just change, climate change, that erosion happens that much faster.
Got it. So wait, I know you usually do a lot of research for your book. So I imagine you went deep, no pun intended, on sinkholes for this?
I didn't go as deep on sinkholes because sinkholes don't leak bitumen, which is like this tar sand that I have coming out of the sinkhole in Good Neighbors, because I love it as a device, and I love it as like it tracks through the neighborhood throughout the story. And the more this excavation happens looking for this lost girl, the more the rescue crews just drag it all over the neighborhood, this like black tar. And I thought, I don't care that that's impossible. Like, or it's very unlikely. There are tar sands in Long Island, but what I actually really researched a lot was narcissism. And I was, first of all, well, I'll start with the narcissism. I did a ton of research on that. I was trying to figure out who is the type of personality that would drive a neighborhood to turn against another family. They would have to be charismatic. They would have to have a really strong personality. And they would have to, so the more I thought about it, what fit, it was a narcissist. And narcissists are really fascinating. I mean, I know a lot of people have talked about narcissism because
I think so too.
Yeah, but it's not, it's so much more painful. These people suffer extremely. It's an affliction, it's a sickness. It's like they have these wounds in childhood, and the way that they compensate and cope is to make this, to wear this mask where they act perfect all the time. And they need other people to reflect that and to say that they're perfect and tell them they're perfect. And they never grow out of it, at least until they're in middle age. And it's extremely lonely. They don't let anyone in, but they're very successful. They're often CEOs. And they kind of view everyone around them as appendages. And what's interesting is, like, if you view other people around you as appendage, you don't really see them as real. and you kind of see yourself in this grandiose, extra special way. And so Rhea is a narcissist, and it's just the things that narcissists will do in order to protect their mask are insane. And they're the only kind of people with personality disorders who will do these things.
Did you, when you say you did when you said you did research, like, were you looking at actual case studies or just like clinical literature?
I looked at case studies, and then I just like read up all about narcissists. And then I listened to this podcast that had deep dives from this Psychology in Seattle. It's a podcast this guy does, but he's got these deep dives that are like 10 hours that are just about what is a narcissist? What do they look like? How do they act? And there's just so many different things. Like, they're less likely to wait online for any reason because they're like, no way, you know, it's, yeah, it's like, that's also, same with me. And then the other thing I researched was crowd mentality, because I was trying to figure out how does a mob behave and why do they behave that way? And I researched Kitty Genovese, who is the woman that reportedly was in this Queens apartment building or just outside of it, and her neighbors were so indifferent, supposedly, that while she was being beaten to death and screaming for help, they all saw, but none called the police, and then she died in the alley. And that was like what we were all taught. And I don't know if you were taught this in college, but it was in sociology classes. Like, this is the herd mentality, and this is the bystander effect. A bystander won't call the police because they assume everybody else is calling the police. And so I looked into it thinking like, oh, this could give me some information. And I found out that it was totally not true, that Kitty Genovese, a lot of people in her building called the cops. Somebody ran out and told the boyfriend to leave. He did. And they all thought it was settled. And then he came back and dragged her somewhere where they couldn't see her. And the people were still waiting. The cops never showed up. When they found out she was still being hurt, a neighbor came out and held her as she died. But then the New York City cops covered it up because they didn't want people to know. And then a friend of mine said that it might have been an explanation for white flight. You know, it was just what is that? An urban legend in order to justify, like, oh, we're so bad that we have to leave, to like place the blame on themselves so they didn't feel as bad about leaving.
Well, you know, someone, not to interrupt, but someone just asked in the Q&A, they asked, and I want to take their question slightly in a different direction because it ties in a little what you're saying, is they asked the amount of time between Good Neighbors and your previous book, which is like 12 years, dude. That's a long time. And they want to know if this novel is something you worked on little by little. Was the plot, did it come together quicker than your previous work? And what I wanted to take their question, because I'm a narcissist, and twist it to my own ends, is I was reading an interview with you from like 2013, which you were talking about working on a book set in Garden City. And it was talking about the dual income trap and families feeling under attack.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And clearly this was originally called Empty Houses. And now this book has morphed a lot. Can you sort of talk about where you started and what kind of radiation hit this book along the way that changed it?
Oh, this is insane. But I started this with the housing crisis, like in like the collapse.
Oh yeah, that would have been 08.
Oh yeah. And I thought empty houses, and it would be like neighbors and half had left, and I would write this horror story. And I worked on it for a while, maybe like a year, and then I got pregnant and I had my next child. And in that year, I just decided not to work because with 2 kids, like I didn't write that year, and that was a nice year for me. And then when I got back to it, I just didn't see the book anymore, Empty Houses. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And I started a new book called Clinic. And I worked on that for 5 years, and then it didn't sell. And then,
ouch.
It was so bad.
I'm sorry, that sucks.
Well, we didn't send it everywhere, but no, it didn't sell. So then I looked back, and everyone had said they liked Empty Houses, but I couldn't find my way around it. And some of the reason was because there was an asteroid originally that falls down, and it's the same, it's a barbecue, but then something comes up and the neighbors begin to attack each other because of some malevolent force. And I couldn't make it work. And the reason, I think, is because at that time, social media was huge, and like Facebook and these constant infightings and Twitter. And it felt to me like there wasn't a monster anymore. There were just constant binaries of you're this or you're that. You agree or you disagree. Everybody repost. And I feel like we're seeing the inevitable conclusion of that these last few months. And the idea of making it a monster didn't work because it's such a human story. And so I realized I had to make it a human story. And I realized that narcissism was the issue. And I don't think that my character Rhea is the only narcissist. I think we are suffering from cultural narcissism. And this isn't like a moral judgment. I'm not like we're all bad. It's an injury. And I think that this tendency to be triggered, to react, to fight with each other over things that we're having different arguments. We're fighting with ghosts in our own minds while the other person's talking and we're not hearing them. And that to me is the horror of Good Neighbors. And once I kind of realized that there was no monster in the story, that it was in fact just a thriller, then it whipped out. But that was really hard to learn how to do. And it was kind of a scary decision because I know how to write a slasher, but like to come out and say, well, oh, what if I don't have any monsters at all? What do these conversations with characters look like then? You know?
Wait, can I ask a quick question? How much had you written of Empty Houses before you decided to like just put that version aside?
Probably like 300 pages. And then I had a chapter for almost every character in that book with a backstory, like just crazy.
And did you wind up cannibalizing any of that for Good Neighbors, or is this completely, those are just dead bones in the backyard?
Dead bones. It's totally dead bones.
Ouch, it is hard to walk away, man.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is. But it's that same thing of once you find the thing that's the right thing, you don't want to go back to the thing that was the wrong thing.
Right,
anyway.
right. Now, are you a fast writer? Like in terms of like turning out words?
Well, I mean, I wrote a short novel in like 3 months when the pandemic first started that's already out, you know, and
was that Changeling?
It's called You Have the Prettiest Mask.
Okay.
Lady Churchill's Rosebud Brislet. And then, yeah, you know, even though it's been like a drought with novels, I don't know, I publish a whole bunch of short stories every year. So
yeah, no, I just wonder if like, because like I'm a fast writer. I'm not always a good writer, but I write, and I wonder if like writing quickly like is one of those things that makes it easier to walk away sometimes if something's just not working and start again.
You know what it is? It's just my personality. I can't walk away from anything, and I'm trying to learn, like, because I don't think it serves.
You walked away from an entire book.
Oh, the clinic?
Yeah,
oh, no,
well, not
do you
the clinic.
think I'm really gonna walk away?
No, but like Empty Houses. I mean, you walked away from a lot of work and hours and started over. I mean, that's some willpower.
That doesn't feel like walking away, honestly. That feels like,
okay.
Oh, this is just the next edit, you know, and like there's, I mean, I'm sure you go, I've found entire like half novels on my laptop that I'm like, when did I write this? And it's like slightly familiar to me, but not really. You know?
Yeah, I also write a lot of different versions of a book that are radically different before I get to a final book. But I assume that was because I was just inefficient at this job. It's interesting that someone else has the same problem. So not to throw your words in your face, but I enjoy doing it. And you gave the interviews. It's interesting because, and this is a little bit long, so I apologize, but you know, The Keeper is really about a system breaking down. It's like a neighborhood. It's a town breaking down with this supernatural force. And yeah, I imagine it was a hell of a lot of fun to write, just like, you know, going for broke with like all the stuff happening. And it's not too far off from Good Neighbors. I mean, in the sense of here's a neighborhood breaking down, except this time you made it harder for yourself and you took out the monsters and you made it the people. But there was an interview you gave a long time ago, like 2007, where you were saying that the suburbs aren't scary anymore. Like that people used to think suburbs were scary because there was this potential to homogenize us, but now it's happened and that's just the way things are. And so it's way more interesting to write about parts of the world that are smaller, that are more off the beaten path, that sort of had the shadow of like the mom and pop industries. And you've clearly come around on thinking a suburban neighborhood doesn't have a story to tell. So like, how did you evolve? Like, was that just getting older and sort of looking at the world more differently, or?
You know, sometimes I say things and I believe them in the moment. But I think it's also about going home. You know, I come from the suburbs, so there's this poignancy to going back there or setting anything there that probably I just wasn't ready to do. But also, I think I don't think Good Neighbors is stylized, but I do think it's kind of clear that this isn't just about a suburb. This is kind of about America's idea of itself. And so it's like, yeah, it says it's the suburbs. These are the values of the suburbs, but it could really happen anywhere, as long as it was an enclosed community. And so like, I've always had, my favorite play is Art Town. Anytime it's anywhere, I go see it, and I'm obsessed with it. And I feel like it's, you know, Our Town is this story that seems so folksy, right? But it's, to me, it's not. It's just asking all these giant existential questions, and you know, they die halfway through. You're in the afterlife.
It fits like, in the horror genre. Like half of the thing is with ghosts.
Yeah. And then you have the piano teacher, or the music teacher, and it's like, oh, some people just weren't meant to be in a small town. Yeah. And it's like, that's the true answer. You could look for every answer of what is it specifically about him, but the truth is, it just isn't, it's too much for him. He's too much of an artist to belong there. And it's so, I love that. And then you look at, when I saw Dogville, I don't know if you've seen Dogville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's his answer to Our Town, you know? And it's like, I had to turn it off. And then I had to read what happens in the end before I could go watch it, because I was so upset. You know, I think he's like a, you know, he's a prankster. I think that's a much more, I don't even think he believes that's what Americana really is.
Yeah.
I think he was just, yeah.
But you know, talking about Dogville, because Dogville, I find Lars von Trier adopts this incredibly cynical mask or attitude about stuff a lot of the time. But Good Neighbors is not a cynical book, dude. This is the most hard on its sleeve thing I've ever read you. I haven't read a lot of your short stories. I mostly read your novels and your longer stuff, but I've never seen you write something this hard on your sleeve. Explain yourself.
I think it's because I have children now, and the things that I thought that I read in books, or the things that I read in books that I thought were mawkish, I find myself now saying and doing, like, I love you to the moon and back, la la la, you know. But it's like, oh, but that's, you know, so I have that different way of seeing things, but also I just have more knowledge about human relationships than I think I did then.
Fair enough. Well, you know, there's a thing in the book that really is where I sort of really got into it, and that's early on. So just for people, so people have some idea of what we're talking about, a lot of the book is about two families who live next to each other, the Wilds and the Schroeders, right? Yeah. And so the Schroeder's daughter, who I think is a little bit older, is Shelley, and the Wilds' daughter is like or within the
Julia.
same year, Julia.
Yeah.
And they were really good friends, and now they hate each other. And they have a moment where it goes from, and I almost feel like I'm spoiling it, and so I'm not trying to, but they go from having this intense fight to having this really compassionate conversation. And it's one of the most realistic exchanges between, because a lot of times people will write kids, especially kids who aren't quite teenagers, who are in those tween years, and they'll just get it wrong. And this was one of the most real passages I've ever read about kids that age. Like, is that something you saw, or did it change when you were writing it? Or like, where did that fit in with your writing? Because like, I'm just jealous of that exchange and I want to know how to do it.
Well, I worked on it. I worked on it pretty hard because that was so important to me. And I feel like that age, for me, I think everybody develops differently, but 6th grade was the age that I started to be like, is God real? And, you know, like, who are these people who are raising me? And that's at the same time when you start having these really close friendships that feel like family, and you tell each other everything. You know, you confess everything, and they're so important to you, and they're so foundational to, I think, the direction you take and who you're going to be. I think middle school is much more so than high school, those impacts. And like, I don't know, I kind of based it on my friendships at that age, and how devastating and important they were to me. And also those friends that you had who were having hard times, and you could see it, and it just ached and it killed you in ways that as an adult, you know, we've just been through too much life for it to affect us the same way. But at that age, it's just, you just care. I cared so much about my friends, and I just, anything, they'd tell you a problem that was a serious problem, because kids that age are aware of their serious problems, and they're big, you know?
Well, and it's also a feeling at that age, or at least I had it, where you didn't have the equipment to do anything about your friends' situations. And so there was a feeling of real frustration and sort of injustice to that.
Well, and it felt like they could die or something, you know, that didn't happen.
And no one was going to care.
Yes, or no one knew, or this adult society just wasn't looking at it. And you lived in your own world. And yeah. And then the other thing is, I have kids who are coming up to that age, and I get to see things that that are kind of mostly delightful, you know, like a bunch of girls in my house pre-pandemic, and I'd like walk in and they'd all be like raiding the refrigerator. And it's like, oh, this is so fun. They're raiding my refrigerator.
I'm mom.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I mean, I don't have kids, and it's funny to see how much having them kind of, I don't know, really changed you as a writer, you know, or your approach to this stuff. You know, it's like, it's really, really fascinating. And I know you've talked before, you've written about it, but I think we had a conversation about it years ago at a con about how even reading, like, you're so much more forgiving of the way Stephen King writes some of his stuff that people find sentimental, because you're like, well, it's just, that's normal, that's human.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I just, my writing has changed a ton because of that. I've also just matured and gotten older like everybody else.
Which I enjoy. I like getting older. I think I don't want to be 20 again, God.
Well, I mean, I also, exactly, because that would be awful. But I think also I was just fueled by outrage back then, and I would have burned out and had to have figured something else out, whether I'd had kids or not. But now, I mean, I do feel like it's more about curiosity than outrage. So I'm like fueled, and I have all these feelings of wanting the world to be different, but I also I just want to know why. And I want to explore why people act the way they do, as opposed to like judging them.
Yeah, someone in the Q&A actually asks, they want to know about the kids' moral universe versus adults' behavior, like, sort of this morality the kids seem to have that the adults don't. But I'm not sure and I'm not saying this question's intended judgmentally, but I'm not sure you think of it that judgmentally, that the kids just somehow have some moral superiority to the adults. Or do you? I don't know. I'm putting words in your mouth.
No, I don't. I think that the parents they just have more triggers than the kids. The kids are blank slates, and the parents have these burdens on them. They've got to make mortgage, and they've got to protect their children. And there's people with guns out there closing schools, and there's a sinkhole, and there's refugees, and there's war, and there's all these things happening right outside. And it's terrifying. And the idea that maybe there's something bad happening on their block is just a little too much for them. And it's really just their best instincts turning on them and making them worse people than they should be. And I think that's the tragic thing. And I think the kids don't have the responsibilities of the adults. So the kids can say, like, I don't have to worry about you. I just have to do what I think is the right thing. So I think they're just coming from really different places. But I also, like, my hope, a lot about that sinkhole is about the ways in which this generation has a debt that threatens to consume the next generation. And
you mean like an environmental debt?
Environmental debt, and also cultural. I think there's so many different issues in Good Neighbors about just what people are bringing to the table and why that's messing everything up. Instead of just coming in clean and meeting the neighbors, introducing themselves, it's these constant, like, well, this reminds me of my childhood, or this, these people aren't cool because they smoke outside, and I heard that's not okay. There's so much going on that doesn't need to be there. It's just noise. And it's a lot about the noise, the sinkhole.
And just to remind people, feel free to throw something into the Q&A whenever you want. We'll grab your questions as we go. When you were talking earlier about one thing you like about toxicology is sort of just watching things fail, but in predictable ways, or, if X, then Y to some extent. If you do this, then this will happen. There is an element of Good Neighbors that feels like kind of there's a sort of chilly Cronenbergian experimental air to it, in the sense of, like, it feels like a science experiment. Like, here's the ant colony. We're going to introduce this thing and see what happens. And part of that, I realize the reason it feels a little clinical to me, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like almost like forensic to me, is the framing devices you use. Because throughout, you have these interludes between the chapters, the beginning and end, where people are sort of looking back on this. And going into this book, we know that there's an incident that happens that has a lot of ramifications. Was that part of the book from the beginning, or did that sort of, those framing devices come in later?
So the first, the opening, I always had some version of that. And I always had what was going to happen at the end. But then I decided to add all those other devices, like the reporter who's got this agenda that you really see throughout. Because it was fun to make a comment on media and the way that media impacts the way that we interpret information. So I was trying to do that, and I was also just having some fun as an author. And I also reread Carrie, because I thought, who does this really well? And Carrie does it, or Stephen King does it in Carrie, where he has these articles. And there's one point in Carrie where he tells you exactly what's going to happen. Do you remember that? And I remember reading it and being like, this is awful. And I wanted it to be wrong. I wanted it to be a false report. So I had to reach the end, and I thought, I was kind of studying that, of how I would see if I could pull that off too.
See, I never remembered the framing stuff, the interstitials in Carrie, until I went back and reread it a few years ago. And I was like, and like you just said, it would not be the same book without that stuff, giving this sort of inevitability. It would just be, I don't know, it'd feel flimsier somehow.
It would. And then there's that wonderful part where there's the next door neighbor of Carrie who was like in her bathing suit. And she just,
Yes.
it's like Kafka's Metamorphosis, the sister of the dung beetle, you know, and she's just stretching and lithe and her life is okay. It's like this total contrast that lets you know, like, oh, life is going on outside of the story. Because it finishes, she's in Los Angeles, you know?
Yeah.
It's like,
well,
oh,
and
okay.
the weirdest thing to me about that is like, that was a last minute addition because like Carrie was too short. And so his editor was like, we need to beef this up. And so he put those all in at the end. And it feels so organically part of the book. And the book wouldn't be the work, I don't think, without it. But
I don't
it's
think
so
either.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone was asking, and because they're a Canadian, I want to hear their question answered. Is sort of what was the hardest part with Good Neighbors? Like, was there a point where you were like, this isn't right, and then something clicked and it completed for you, or what was the hardest part to get right for you?
So I just kept exploding at page like 200, where I had all of the neighbors coming after each other, and I was like, this is the most boring story. Like, I should have been like thrilled to have them all kill each other.
Yeah.
I had these great backstories for them all, and I was like, why am I doing this? And it's kind of, that's the blueprint for horror, is like, you introduce everybody, you show their faults, and then you kill them off one by one, you know? And then there's some moral judgment at the end. And it's not all horror, but that's, you know.
Oh, a fair amount.
It's a lot of horror. So I was like, this is horrible. You know, I can't do this. So I had to redo it. And then the other thing that was really hard to write was I hated giving Gertie flaws. There's this one part where she drives away from Julia and Larry early on, where they're being teased by the Rat Pack. And I knew that it would kill Gertie. Like, I knew that the rest of the day, like, she was real in my head, that she was like, I did something wrong and I feel sick, but I don't know what it is, because she's so conflict avoidant, you know, that she would spend the next like week being like, something wasn't right. And those kinds of failures of parenthood are really common, and they're really painful, and they're really hard to admit. And I do them all the time, but they hurt. And just even writing out another character's failure as a mother was painful.
So that was actually something that I thought was really interesting, that the book boils, but when it boils over, it was completely out of the blue. And I assume, I don't have my copy in front of me, but so I assume that was your rewrite starting at 200. But I know the feeling where everything just sort of starts feeling fake in your hands, and you like start to testing what you're writing.
Yeah. I have a really good agent, and Stacia Decker, and she'd be like, I don't think this is how people act. And she just like constantly would write that. And I'd be like, seems like this is a good way to move the plot though. So maybe you're missing the point. And then I'd sit on it and I'd be like, that's right. That's not how people act. Yeah. And then I would have to go back and think about, well, how do they act? What do people do? Yeah. What is the formula that makes, these specific circumstances that make the outcome that I have in the book? And I wanted to do that as realistically as I could.
Yeah, that's one of the things I find myself having to fight writing is the plot. Because you come up with all these scenes and you're like, oh, we'll build this and this will happen. It'll be a really cool thing. And the more you shoehorn them in and you get to them, the worse ideas they are. I don't know if any of those things has ever survived to the final draft of anything I've written. It's hard to go with the characters.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the tone. Like with The Missing, I was like, I'm going to do it all. I'm going to do like the craziest stuff. And it's like, it's insane. Like this mother decapitates her zombie children and like, sure. And like all the stuff but that's a gonzo horror novel. If you want to write something Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about kids, so I don't want to get too analytical here, but what's the first piece of sort of horror culture that you remember making an impression on you as a kid? A movie, a book, an image?
There's like a bunch, but so I'll start with like, so New York used to have like WOR TV Channel 9 that had like all the old vampire movies, like Christopher Lee, and like I would like hold garlic and watch it when I was really little. You know, come over after like after Abbott and Costello, this would come on or whatever. And then Lois Duncan wrote a book called Summer of Fear.
Oh yeah,
that I
yeah.
I remember having to hide it. Like I was like, I can't look at this cover. I can't go to sleep with this cover. It's gonna kill me.
Wait, is
like,
Summer of Fear about the girl whose family's in witness protection, or no? I'm getting it wrong.
No, it's about the one where like the cousin comes to visit, but she's not really a cousin. She's a witch, and she seduces the dad.
Oh,
And like the cover's like
yeah.
half normal face and half like monster, like the Hulk,
Yeah.
but it's only like yeah.
Wait, so were you a big Lois Duncan fan?
I loved her
Daughters
stuff.
of Eve.
I didn't read Daughters of Eve. Is that a good one?
Oh, it's great. Someone saying in the comments that their mom took away Summer of Fear in 6th grade. I'm sure it was the cover. And then Lois Duncan had such a weird life too.
I don't know anything about her.
Oh, well, so, you know, she wrote all these sort of teens in peril books, right? And often the young girl is, you know, I know what you did last night, all that stuff. And her own daughter was abducted and murdered. And she sort of put fiction aside and devoted the rest of her life to finding out who did it, because it was an unsolved homicide. Yeah, it's crazy, right?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you remember the first book besides like adult book that you read that was horror that was like made an impact on you? Not that Lois Duncan is an adult, but like.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It was 6th grade. I think I read John Saul and Stephen King. I read.
John Saul. Yeah.
But
The
like,
covers are so good.
Yeah, they were. I think The God Project was the first one.
That's
like,
one of his. I haven't read it. Everyone says is super messed up.
Yeah, no, it's like these babies that are really like monsters, but they're like a government experiment, and the girls die when they're born young, and that's what SIDS is. But then the boys like become the killers, and they're psycho.
Well, it's funny. It's interesting to look at like kids in horror. Like you look at Good Neighbors, where the kids are, I mean, some of the kids in Good Neighbors are just repulsive little morons who I remember growing up, kids like that. But the kids are to a large extent also have some of the best of us. But then you read like a lot of paperback horror from like the 70s and 80s, and kids are usually Satan in some guise.
Totally.
So
they weren't.
Yeah, go ahead.
They weren't written for us when we were reading them. Like I don't think like John Saul and Stephen King were like, my reader's a 10-year-old,
Exactly. Although Stephen King, that's the best age to encounter him for the first time, I think, is like 10 to 12, somewhere in there. Like it's perfect.
Yeah.
Because it feels so adult. Feels like you're reading
Yeah.
like adult people's diaries.
It does.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of this, so I'm going to do a little lightning round here. But what's the movie you've seen the most number of times? Doesn't have to be your favorite, but the one you just wind up watching the most.
Probably The Ring. I've watched that a ton, but maybe
The original
Fugitive.
one?
No, the Fugitive, which is like anytime that's on, I'm like, I can't stop watching The Fugitive. Like,
yeah, what is it about that movie? Yeah, it's weird, right?
It's perfect. I don't know why.
Know.
It's just like, and then the Tommy Lee Jones.
I don't care.
Harrison Ford, like, it's like,
yeah,
they're good at their jobs.
Yeah.
Everybody's good at their job. Like, that's like the most important thing.
Confidence. Yeah.
Confidence.
Well, and I have daddy issues. So that movie's got like 2 big daddies in it. I'm like, adopt me. Do you write longhand or laptop?
Laptop.
Laptop. Do
I
you ever
never,
do longhand? No.
Unless it's like a journal entry, which very rarely, or poems. Sometimes I'll write a poem.
Yeah.
Usually,
Do you have to like?
usually I'm like sad. I'm sad if I write a poem.
And do you have to like? Do you enjoy sitting down to work, or is it something that you have to sort of force yourself to do?
I love it. Yeah.
You do?
It makes me super happy. And I love having the space. I'm in a garage right now, but it's kind of amazing. Like I was writing in a writer space during the pandemic and it was shared, and I like to take a nap like in the middle of the day.
Naps help.
They really do. And I couldn't take a nap. So now I have this space and there's like a janky bed in the
I was gonna say, do you have a
garage.
napping couch? What do you have?
Yeah.
A bed, a couch?
So it's actually really nice. And I feel like it's my space. It's really nice. I haven't had a space this big and since we lived in Brooklyn, and even then, so.
Well, the first time I ever realized I could just stop my workday in the middle and take a nap, I felt so dirty and illicit. And then I'm like, I don't know how I get through a day without it. Who are these creeps who stay awake all day? I don't get it.
I know, like if you don't have to, because I
Who
just
wants to
burn
do that?
out, you just need the rest.
Exactly. So I was going to ask if you kept a journal, but it sounds like you only do when you're super sad.
It's true.
It's like, if
And then
anyone
I read my journal and I'm like, this is terrible.
well, it's like if anyone ever finds it, they're going to be Sarah Langan was the most unhappy woman in the world. Never a good day.
I just need to know when I'm going to die so I can burn them beforehand,
Well, that's what I sometimes. Exactly. That's what I sometimes think with Shirley Jackson when people like she struggled with depression. If you read her diary, I'm like, maybe she just wrote on days that sucked.
Totally.
I mean, have you ever written anything that you've regretted? Like a dialogue, a scene, a piece of dialogue, a character, a book, a story, or that's like either because you were like, I wouldn't write that anymore, or it's come back to bite you?
So The Keeper is intense and it has an intense sexual abuse scene. I don't regret that because I feel like, but I wouldn't write it again because I'm not the same person. And it was very in your face, but I did hear from a lot of people that it meant something to them. So I'm totally okay with that existing. However, so I'm super allergic to dogs and cats, and like no one ever believes me. And they're always like, my dog is hyperallergenic. And like, you should rub your face in my pet and then like hold it on an airplane. And like, it drives me crazy. So I think some of the reason that I'm always killing animals in my stuff is because I'm like, you and your stupid pet that's killing me. Because I've been hospitalized. I'm like, it's bad. So, but now I've finally realized like the thing about a pet death for people who own pets is like, they've all had it. So almost the whole country has had a really traumatic pet death of something they super loved. And it's just not something I really understand. So I don't think I would kill off a pet, a dog.
Yeah.
Again.
Well, it's funny. I have a dog die in one of my books, and I still get, this book came out years ago, I still will get the occasional hate email about it. And this dog had to die, but it's very weird because I feel like I want to write about the real world I see around me. And one of the things in every family and everyone's life is most people have pets, and the pets die. And when you're younger, it's a really big deal, but you cannot write about it sanely. It just triggers people really hard. I get it.
They go insane. Insane. And they're like angry. And it's like, but you know that like a dog isn't a like now we're gonna get hate mail.
Oh wow. No. I was like automatically nodding. I'm shaking my head at the lack of humanity here.
It's bad. It's
bad, Sarah. Well, but that's the thing though, right? Like animals die. We outlive them. And it's and I guess maybe because people carry that grief around with them and it's really hard that it's so tough on people when that scene happens. But it is an area I won't go into again because it's too rough on folks.
I don't want to deal with it. But I also feel like, I mean, you don't want to sneak attack on someone. And the other thing is like, I guess killing off a human is fair play because they exist in our universe. Whereas like a pet is something innocent that doesn't exist in our narrative. And I think people might be like, that's not fair. That pet isn't a part of the society we've made. You don't get to use that pet as a metaphor for what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. That's smarter than what I would have said. So someone else asked a question. I want to get to it because I did want to ask this. Where did you go to university in Maine?
Oh, I went to Colby College in Waterville, Maine.
Oh, got it. Okay. Colby's like a hippie school, right? A little bit, or no? Am I hallucinating?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Is it like Reed or okay?
No, it's more like people majored in economics and biology.
Oh, okay.
English. Yeah.
And so, someone want to know if you've been back since you were there in university?
Oh yeah, a ton. Before the shutdown, I brought the kids. We went all the time. Big G's did something. Like I was just thinking about how much there's like this sandwich shop in Winslow outside Waterville that had like sandwiches that were like this big, and in college that's the perfect size sandwich, you know.
Well, I love that the horror map of America is like New York City, Los Angeles, a little bit of Bigfoot, and Maine, you know, like it's just like looms large in this genre.
Yeah, but there's that guy.
Oh God, yeah, what's his name? I cannot always forget. Anyways, hey Kat. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. I feel bad.
I was so excited to do that to someone.
Thanks, Grady. This is awesome. And I only came back at 7 because I told you I would. I didn't really want to stop the conversation. But
you're a woman of your word.
I try to be, always. Well, thank everyone for coming. It was great turnout. Amazing conversation. Any final thoughts, you two?
Sarah?
You should buy our books, but also thanks for coming.
Yeah.
It's really nice, and this has been really fun. And Grady, thank you so much for doing this. I love your books so much. So it's a real honor.
No, this was a blast. And I like talking to people about books. So like, it's fun to actually do it with someone who wrote it. And I also just final thought, like Jerry Springer. I just wanted to say, I know I'm speaking to the choir here because you guys are all at a virtual event for Novel, but you know, please, independent bookstores need some love. I have nothing against Amazon. I ordered something from them today, but Amazon will be here next year. And even though Kat and everyone at Novel is putting a happy face on it, times are really freaking hard for small businesses right this minute. So if you know, that extra $4 you're going to pay for your book by ordering from an independent bookstore, from Novel, from bookshop.org, wherever, it is the tax we pay to have a community. And these people know what you read. They know who you are. They know your face. When the pandemic started, the bookstore downtown here would actually, my mom just gave them her credit card and they would just drop a new book off on her front porch once a week. And they would always like text me and like, your mom was alive. She waved through the window, and like Amazon drones aren't going to do that. So these are our neighbors. So please pay the extra bucks and order an extra book this week from an independent bookstore, Novel or otherwise. Order Sarah's book, order 2, give one as a gift.
Highly recommend Sarah's book or Grady's book or both tonight. And I read them both last year, and they're 2 of my favorites. And it's so cool that you're both here.
The other thing I want to say is if you order a book through Novel, then you are automatically entered for a Zoom with me and my editor, Lone Lee. For your book club, for whoever, which is super cool. I mean, Lone's an amazing editor. So
yes.
And editors never do stuff like this, and they're kind of fun once you get them talking. Like, they know where the bodies are buried.
Well, thanks again, y'all. And thanks to our audience for your support, your words of support to Grady and Sarah. We really do appreciate it. And thanks for being here. Thanks for being awesome and writing the books that we love to sell. Everybody,
thanks for letting me do this. Bye. Happy book birthday, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Kat. Bye, Grady.
Thanks for being here.